Your strength is severely limited by the inhibitions of your conscious mind, but those inhibitions can be removed. You can learn what I refer to as internal strength skills, skills and techniques that allow you to make the act of lifting increasingly subconscious, allowing you to double or triple your current performances on basically every lift. Many of these techniques are habits that elite lifters tend to pick up instinctively through many years of training or through innate athletic talent, but they're basically never articulated or directly taught by anyone because they're too subtle for most people to even notice. Luckily, I am not most people. Using my pathological self-awareness and schizophrenic pattern recognition, I've meticulously categorized and articulated every internal strength skill and principle that I've come across in my last decade of training, allowing you to just straight up learn them directly to unlock a tremendous amount of hidden strength potential immediately, and skip the many years it would have taken you to come across these ideas organically. This video will be broken down into 5 sections. Big ups to Musashi.
You were the only one who understood.
First 3 sections will be something like a direct explanation and tutorial for every internal strength skill and principle that I know. However, that really won't be sufficient enough to learn them at the highest level. So section 4 will be something like a training game that'll allow you to learn everything I cover in this video at an extremely accelerated rate, sort of like a scuffed hyperbolic time chamber that's horrifically painful. Then finally in section 5, I'm going to basically be giving out a scathing criticism of the modern fitness industry and how it basically stifles most lifters' potentials by rejecting the Tao or way of strength that I think is strongly implied by the existence of internal strength skills. Let's get into it.
Come on, metal fudge.
The first skill I'd like to cover is something I call proprioceptive awareness. If I asked you to close your eyes and find the back of one hand with the pointer finger of another, you could do it with no problems whatsoever. That's because you have a sense called proprioception, which is literally the ability to feel where parts of your body are in space relative to each other. And I really mean it when I say feel here. This is not like a mere visualization. It's literally a physical but very subtle feeling. Becoming proprioceptively aware of your palms, for example, literally feels like you can sense the existence of your palms and their connection to you. Like the exact opposite of what it would feel like if they just fell asleep.
Closer. Don't touch.
Wait, am I supposed to feel something? Because I'm feeling a tingling sensation.
Keep going.
Now I'd like you to try to extend this awareness that you have of your hand and this feeling of being aware of it into your entire body, trying to encompass everything from your head down to your toes, and really trying to get a feel of where your whole body is in space. Done properly, this should give you an immediate, subtle feeling of your body's own weight and how it's resting into whatever kind of surface is currently supporting you. While maintaining this full body awareness, you are dramatically stronger and more balanced than you are normally.
If I'm not taking this into consideration, you apply force.
Yeah.
Boom, I fly. Second time, I take it into consideration.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yes.
And if you want, you can just go test this out for yourself right now. I think the easiest way to do this is to go find an object or a weight that you'd under normal circumstances struggle to front raise, and then using proprioceptive awareness, you'll notice that you should be able to do it pretty easily. The way this works, I think, is pretty interesting. What seems to be happening when most people try to lift a weight is that they become proprioceptively fixated on whatever body part is in contact with that weight. So in the example of the front raise, most people become immediately fixated on the sensation of their hand. Doing this seems to muddle your body's overall ability to coordinate itself using the entire proprioceptive map of your body, causing you to struggle to move a weight because it throws you off balance. And moving in a way that throws you off balance is extremely difficult and often impossible. Effectively using this skill, you are actively overcoming this problem of fixation by forcing yourself to stay broad and open and aware, making it very unlikely that you misgroove a weight by accident, and making it very easy to move in a manner and adjust yourself automatically so as to always be in balance while moving, preventing your strength from ever being interrupted. The strength and balance you get from using this skill should carry over into any activity, and I think it's a huge part of what people call being naturally athletic. Proprioception is also arguably the most fundamental skill for learning our next internal strength skill, what I call structuring. Structuring is probably what elite powerlifters mean when they talk about staying tight, and probably what elite bodybuilders mean when they talk about the mind-muscle connection or squeezing a muscle. It refers to a specific, nuanced way of manipulating muscle tension in a manner that allows you to get more strength out of them and make all of your reps in training more effective at building your strength and muscle. To understand what I'm getting at, it's important that you actually try this out yourself. If you play around with flexing your arm, you'll notice that you can actually tense the muscles of your arm in two very distinct ways. You can simply create tension that just moves your arm, which I call moving tension, or you can create another kind of tension that tensions your arm in place, which I call structuring tension or structuring. This is the kind of tension that's typically used to show off muscles, like in the case of a pec dance, or flexing in a mirror in a way that doesn't, co-contract against a resistance. When most people try to move a weight, they tend to only use moving tension in their muscles to go about doing so. And this severely limits the output of strength that they're capable of, because it's possible to actually use both moving tension and structure tension simultaneously, and doing so makes you dramatically stronger. That's because structure tension has two properties that greatly enhance your ability to produce force. First, it's self-stabilizing. Structured body parts automatically contract in any way that they need to resist being moved by external forces, even as you direct them to move in a specific way. This allows you to tank a lot of the instability that would otherwise disrupt the flow of your strength when you try to lift something. Structure tension also binds every body part that's using it simultaneously together into one tensegrity unit, allowing forces to be distributed across much broader areas than they'd normally be. When these properties combine together, they form what is essentially the perfect foundation for the application of more conventional moving tension. Now let's talk about how you can actually create this sort of structure tension throughout your entire body. To start with, most people should be able to create structure tension in their arm by just simply trying to tense it in place. And we'll be using this as the sort of nucleation point to learn how to create that same tension throughout every other part of our bodies. This is going to be when proprioceptive awareness becomes relevant again. If you notice exactly what happens when you try to flex your arm in place, you'll become aware that what's actually happening is you're finding a location in your arm, in your proprioceptive map of your own body, and then sending that location the impulse to tense. All you have to do to tense any other part of your body is similarly find it in your proprioceptive map and then shoot that same impulse there. And fortunately, we can still achieve full body structure tension without doing this to every single muscle in the body individually, because there are key points throughout the body that I call major structure points. Areas that when flexed, just like you might try to flex your arm, create tension and structure tension throughout very large chunks of your body. And from my observation at least, there's two major structure points in every limb. Two in the arms, two in the head, two in the torso, and two in the legs. I'll show you where each of these points are so that you can practice sending that impulse to flex into each of these areas of your proprioceptive map, and in doing so, learn to create full body structure tension. First, to structure the arms, we already have part of the job done. Most people will automatically tense this area beneath the wrist, and in doing so, create full structure tension through the entire upper arm leading up into the shoulder. However, in order to involve the hands in that structure tension, you have to tense this point in your upper hand. Doing this will make these tendons become taut and create tightness and strength in the fingers that, when initially applied, will create a slight bend in them. By tensing the hand in this way alongside tensing the arm as I showed previously, the entire arm becomes totally structured as one unit. Now let's move into the torso. Flexing a point of the proprioceptive map kind of around the sternum gives you a sense of engaging both of your pecs and the upper back, and a modification of this kind of tension is what is used to pec dance, and it creates structure tension in the upper torso. The second point of the torso is in the abdomen itself. This should also be pretty intuitive for most people, but it's a sense of bracing as if you were going to be punched. Tensing this part of your proprioceptive map gives you the ability to broadly engage the muscles of your abdomen and lower back for the purposes of bracing. Keep in mind, this should not really move your stomach much out or in, because that would be the application of abdominal moving tension and not structure tension. Now let's move into the head and the neck. While mewing and lightly clenching your jaw, you can create structure tension by finding, the kind of mouth region of your proprioceptive map and tensing everything together in place. Kind of like clenching your teeth and forcing your tongue up into the roof of your mouth, but the tension you're creating, again, is not moving tension. You're not actually grinding your teeth. It's a structure tension. Doing that kind of structure tension creates the ability to structure your neck and involve it in various lifts. Another concept I've talked about previously. But that's not all that we can do here, because we can also involve all the muscles that wrap around the skull by trying to tense sort of the forehead area. If you try to flex this area in your proprioceptive map, you'll get a sense of almost like tensing a frown in place that gives you a structure tension that wraps around your skull and sort of inserts into the back of your neck. And that'll give you the ability to effectively brace your head and not just your neck, allowing everything to act again as one unit. And now finally, let's take a look at tensing the legs. To start with, tensing the upper legs and the hips is analogous to how we tense the upper arms, and can be done by simply contracting this point beneath the knee. Creating this tension should give your leg an initial jolt that tightens your quads, hamstrings, and your glutes. And now to engage the feet is very similar to what we did when we engaged the fingers by tensing this region of the wrist. If you find the equivalent area, which is kind of the ball of the foot or the region opposite of it at the top of the foot, and you send the impulse to flex it, you'll notice that you can kind of strengthen and structure the ball of your foot, which gives you a co-contraction between your tibialis and your calf, structuring the entire lower leg and the toes all together as one unit. Doing this kind of looks like you're raising your toes, but it's not just raising your toes. It's a sense of projecting the ball of the foot forward. Once you know how to tense all of these areas individually, you should practice tensing them all together in unison. Properly creating full body structure tension while you lift will basically give you super strength, with each additional structured area of your body giving you a linear increase in your performance. However, there is a caveat. You should not be simply squeezing your structure tension as hard as you possibly can, because doing so actually creates internal resistance inside of your muscles, which makes your strength slip away from you. Instead, to get the most use out of it, you have to develop a sort of sensitivity for using your structure tension at the level of basically being barely engaged, because once again, structure tension is self-stabilizing. All you really have to do is turn it on and allow your body to naturally adjust the amount of tension inside of it in response to the stresses that you face. Of course, those natural adjustments might actually make you as tight as you can possibly get when you're really straining yourself. But the important thing is not to force yourself to that extreme as your baseline. You have to get there as a result of that natural automatic adjustment. You'll know you have structuring down in a given lift if you're able to perform an arbitrarily paused version of that lift. So in the case of something like a bench press, if you can do a spoto press with about 80% of your normal weight with an extended mid-range pause without shaking and without sinking, I'd say you're structuring appropriately for your bench press. Now, I know that was a lot, but again, you don't have to memorize this all here, and I actually recommend that you don't. The best way to really internalize all these ideas is not just practicing them on their own, but instead integrating them into that training game I'm covering in section 4. So don't worry about getting them all down now. It's also worth noting that this is really just the muscular component of a full body brace, but that isn't the full story on bracing. There's also, to a large degree of importance, a breathing component to bracing, which I covered extensively in my last video on ribcage expansion. And I highly recommend you check that video out after this one to further maximize your potential and amplify your strength even beyond what I show here. Proprioception and structuring together constitute what I call ogre Tai Chi, because they're really the supposed fundamentals of Tai Chi, just kind of optimized away from peace-loving geriatrics in parks and towards violent barbarians looking for the strength to tear the arms off their enemies. These techniques work by optimizing the efficiency of your muscular contractions and improving your balance. And for that reason, they're not particularly dangerous or risky to use, even if it's your first time applying any of these concepts. However, every concept we cover from this point forward will be of a very different flavor. The rest of this video will be about directly making your muscles output more than they're normally allowed to, which means that using them will probably stress and exhaust you more deeply than you've ever felt before. I think ultimately they're all healthy and natural to use if you're used to them. But for the uninitiated, it may pose a danger of being injured or maybe overtraining. So I advise that you work up the intensity that you train at using the following cues slowly and develop a tolerance for the exhaustion and recoil that they give you. And with that warning, let's get into the psychological skills.
Teach me, a wise one. You walk through life with a chip on your shoulder and your nerves wound too tight. This tension makes it hard for you to move and fight at your full potential. And so your first lesson is learning to relax.
The first skill of this sort is something I call mindful movement. I'd like you to try squeezing your grip as hard as you possibly can. You'll quickly start to run up against a ceiling that feels like the absolute limit of the amount of tension that you can create. But that ceiling is an illusion that we're going to bypass. What happens when most people exert themselves is that they kind of create like a mental model or a visualization of the action that they're performing, and almost pretend that their body is being puppeteered by that visualization. This creates what is essentially a middleman in between your impulse to move a weight and the action that you're performing. And that middleman is significantly interrupting the flow of your strength and weakening you. Luckily, this inhibition can be easily overcome. I'd like you to try to grip your own arm again and squeeze as hard as you can, trying to reach that ceiling that you hit before. But now this time, I want you to become aware of the internal tension and frustration and imagination and mental effort going into the action you're doing. And then, right as you're beginning to reach your ceiling, I want you to internally relax as much as you possibly can as you continue to intend to squeeze your grip tighter. If you do this properly, you'll get the sense that your strength will almost slip out of you, allowing you to grip way beyond the strength that you were able to just moments before. If you're having trouble with this concept, you might be misinterpreting what I mean by relaxation. Musashi calls this idea mushin, or no mind, and it's a type of relaxation that denotes withdrawing of conscious effort and control, which leaves a fertile soil for your subconscious to take over and perform actions on your behalf according to your intent. To interpret relaxation here to mean going limp or becoming still or unphysically tensed is the opposite of what I'm getting at. That would be the conscious forcing, the conscious imposition of a state of not moving, not a withdrawal of the conscious mind, and a relaxing of its willful effort. The difference in your gripping strength should be enough that you will be able to make your tendons sore, both in the arm being gripped and the arm gripping. That same massive strength increase is available to you in every context, and using it means letting go and relaxing into your effort and exertion. The exact opposite of what most people do. Most people get super autistic and dogmatic and frustrated and tense as they try to grind their way through a movement, and that's killing their strength. If you learn to reflexively let go and relax internally as you exert yourself physically, there's a lot of reps that you'll be able to gain like nothing on all of your lifts. But that's not the end of it, because this concept can be extended even further using something I call explosive intention.
You two are still thinking before you move rather than just moving. Messages can only travel through your nervous system so fast. When you rely on thoughts for physical action, you lose precious fighting time.
The more suddenly you apply your strength, the stronger you are at max output. Many people have this sort of desire to measure and get an idea of how strong they are as they're trying to apply strength into a lift. They ramp their efforts up gradually with the sense that they want to know how heavy a weight feels before they begin to move it. And they do this under the assumption that that doesn't make a difference to the final outcome of how strong they'll be. But that's completely untrue. Checking on something is not a free action. By measuring your effort as you apply it, it seems like you're doing something like intercepting the signal to move before it's fully sent, and then when you continue that signal, that interruption has made it lose momentum and power.
I see. Well, speaking of a left jab.
Oh, this time I intercept your emotional tenseness. You see, from your thought to your fist, how much time was lost.
Not much. Yeah, Lee's gonna teach me all this.
To bypass this inhibition and massively improve your strength even further, you need to learn to blind fire it in a completely binary way. You're shooting it off before you have a chance to measure it, dumping all of your effort and intent to move in one go, the instant you decide to lift with no hesitation whatsoever. By the time you can comprehend the weight is moving or feel what it's like for it to move, you've already started moving it. And ideally, when combined with our mindful movement cue we covered last about relaxing as you apply effort, there's a sense in which movements sort of slip from you or fall from you. The effect of doing this is unbelievable. It allows you to get reps way beyond what you would consider conventional failure. And this is something you can immediately test for yourself. If you try to do some kind of push-up variation to failure, to the point where you can no longer lift yourself off the ground, and then dump all of your strength without measuring your weight at all, just blind fire from the bottom, you'll be able to move past failure likely faster and smoother than you did at the start of your set. Doing this should give you an uncanny sense that your fatigue and own weakness are sort of too slow to catch up with this signal for you to move. It'll also probably give you a troubling sense of uncertainty and fear about being injured if you were to continue, especially when you apply it to more serious lifting, because it'll feel horrifically painful and pretty ungoverned. This fear is its own sort of hurdle for strength, and it requires you develop a degree of aggression and faith to overcome it psychologically.
When it comes to mental preparation, you almost have to have a contempt for the weight.
You'll also have to titrate using this in your training pretty gradually so your body can get used to the stress, hence my previous disclaimer, as well as generally being very diligent in your body's bulletproofing and prehab training so that your body's durability is never a real liability for you. The ideas of this chapter could probably just be called retard strength because they act by removing the inhibitory effect of your conscious kind of dogmatic style of thinking on your strength output. And they work because strength is very similar to speech. It exists in the sort of brackish water between your unconscious and conscious mind. You can only really speak clearly to someone and articulately to someone if you don't really know what you're going to fully say before you say it. The second you start planning out, measuring, and pre-articulating your speech, you no longer are able to speak authentically or clearly, and you begin to stutter.
My name is Jeff.
And a similar breakdown is basically what's occurring in most people when they try to lift weights. By measuring their strength and trying to control it using their imagination, they are making their output stutter. And these psychological cues aim at amending that. But cues alone won't fix your underlying psychology. It's important that you also learn to trust your own mind and body to output strength for you without you having to micromanage it. Now it's time to synthesize everything we've covered together into our final category of compound internal strength skills. The first skill I'll be covering is something I call explosive structuring. I've said previously, when we discussed structuring, that you should be maintaining a very light, sort of barely engaged kind of muscle structure, but there is a very significant place for explosive, violent, and forceful structuring. Pulses of explosive structuring generate a very useful and powerful burst of momentum, and you can use that burst to drive a lift forward. This is very clear to see if you try to pulse your arm as you try to throw like a shitty jab. If I just extend my arm as quickly as I can, I only shake a certain amount, there's only so much momentum and force I can generate. But if I initiate the movement using a pulse of structure through my body, I can get a reverb that goes through my entire body. Now let's talk about how to actually apply this for lifting. First, get a sense of your whole body in your proprioceptive awareness like we talked about previously. Then, create a pulse of violent, explosive structure tension throughout your entire body at once, integrating all the regions we've covered previously. The contraction should come on quickly enough that it creates a jolt of movement that travels all across your body. That burst of movement is a sort of charge that we're going to channel into the movements that we're trying to perform before it just completely dissipates and does nothing. To do that, we're again going to use our proprioceptive awareness. Feel the connection between the weight you're trying to move, your body, and the ground. And then when you apply your explosive structure, you're going to direct all those little jolts of movement into the ground and reflect it from the ground into the weight and movement that you're performing. Altogether, this should create a crazy burst of strength you can use to initiate any lift. Bearing in mind that you're not keeping this full max contraction the entire time as you go through the lift. You're using that as a distinct pulse. It'll hit a peak tension and then ride back down to your baseline, and it'll almost create a wave you can ride out to move. Now is where things will start to get funky. See, most people imagine a lift as broadly being a single kind of effort, meaning that if they were using all the cues we've covered so far, it would look something like one explosive movement using structure to initiate a lift that then peters out as the rep reaches its end. But that's not how the strongest people in the world seem to exert themselves. If you pay close attention to the way bars move, lifts have distinct phases of effort. The beginnings of each of these phases are traditionally known as sticking points, regions where lifts are most liable to slow down and fail. The start of each of these phases can actually be treated as its own sort of initiation of a lift, allowing you to apply the concept of initiating a lift with explosive structuring multiple times throughout a movement, not just at its actual beginning. Doing this allows you to proactively accelerate throughout an entire rep, and makes you massively stronger as a result. To apply this in practice, all you have to do is, in say a deadlift, you would give your first pull your full explosive effort, and the second that rep started slowing down, you wouldn't just try to continue the effort you had before. You'd almost overlay another attempt at doing the lift on top of that effort, carrying a through line of force between them, and just pull again. And then when you reached your next sticking point, you'd pull again. And it would feel like you have maybe 3 or 4 distinct phases of the lift, but it would look to any kind of outside observer that you're just pulling in one continuous effort. Musashi describes a similar concept in a maneuver he calls the spark hit, where if you and your opponent's swords are locked together, you quickly strike again as strongly as possible from the same position without raising your sword at all. And he specifically emphasizes that you have to be exerting strength with your legs, your torso, and your hands, which all seems to me like he's basically using the strength of explosive structuring to use momentum of body parts that are not stalled in the bind to accelerate through the opponent's guard. You'll know you're applying this concept properly if your reps develop a very violent quality in the way that they move, with weights often overshooting their final destination because they've been accelerated near the end of the lift. Now on to our final skill, something I call multi-kipping.
Waterbenders deal with the flow of energy. A waterbender lets their defense become their offense, turning their opponent's energy against them.
Have you ever noticed how much elite lifters seem to wiggle and shake when they perform their lifts, even when the weight that they're lifting is fairly light to them? What I found personally is that wiggling and shaking as you perform a lift is another way of generating momentum in a way that makes you massively stronger. In the same way that there are multiple efforts that exist within a lift at each sticking point, the so-called connecting line of force between each of these miniature efforts is also itself not a constant force. In its best form, it's actually an oscillation, where that base driving force occurs from wiggling and oscillation, generating momentum at every peak, and then body structuring braces you against backsliding on every valley of that oscillation, resetting you for another peak that moves the bar forward, essentially creating the effect of something like a pump or a ratchet, with every wiggle being a kind of power stroke. This essentially allows you to convert a lot of your eccentric strength, which is 50 to 100% stronger than your concentric strength, into concentric strength. Because you're using momentum to assist you in your concentric, bypassing the weakness of concentric movement, and then using your eccentric strength, your structuring, to prevent you from losing progress as you set up your next set of wiggles. Which means the effect of this is crazy. And doing this is not that hard either, because you don't actually have to learn how to wiggle or multi-kip as you move. All you have to do is just learn to stop suppressing all the oscillations your body's already naturally trying to make anytime you lift. Essentially, this skill is the graduated form of our psychological cues. Our earlier cues focused on withdrawing conscious effort when it comes to applying force and initiating the start of a lift. Similarly, in order to use multi-kipping, all you have to do is withdraw your conscious effort when it comes to directing the path of a lift. Most people unknowingly are forcing their bodies to move in clean, crisp, straight lines.
He sat silently brooding and staring at his field. Then it dawned on him suddenly. Unconsciously, he had been trying to create a neat, square field like those common in other parts of the plain. But this was not what the terrain called for. There were slight variations in the lay of the land and the quality of the soil that argued for an irregular shape. "What a fool I've been," he exclaimed aloud. "I tried to make the water flow where I thought it should, and force the dirt to stay where I thought it ought to be. But it didn't work. How could it?"
When you try to lift a weight, simply apply effort to move the weight to its end position, but don't insist on a path. You'll find that your body will organically make these little shaking motions and that they will allow you to grind out reps you had no reason getting otherwise. You can see the effect of multi-kipping most prominently by playing a little game. Have yourself and a friend push against each other as hard as you can until you reach a standstill.
This is like brute force, okay?
Right.
So
yeah.
I'm using power. So that means you are stable.
Then have one of you relax their sense of direction in where they're pushing, and you should notice that that person basically wins immediately and moves the other. And if the resistance is strong enough, this will show a pretty obvious multi-kipping pattern. Now it's time to review all the skills we've covered so far and show you how to put them into practice using a very unique training regimen that should allow you to internalize all of them in a very deep and personalized way. Before I tell you the exact details, I'd like you to know that this is a training method I use all the time, and I think it's plenty safe enough for me. But it is very extreme, and I imagine a lot of people might get hurt trying to do this. So I suggest you go into this knowing that it's dangerous and that you're fully responsible for your own safety. I'm just doing this for entertainment purposes, and you know what, all this has just been like a weird encrypted Minecraft tutorial.
So make sure you guys have this so far. Pause it if you need to.
Please don't sue me. Let's get into it. The way you play this kind of training game is you find a lift that feels horrifically oppressive that you can do from a bottom-up position safely. My favorite way to do this is with a bottom-up partial pin squat, where I set the pins right above or right at the sticking point where I can still comfortably get underneath it and do the weight bottom-up. If you're a weenie, you might do like a bottom-up kind of push-up or something. But I really do think that the more oppressive feeling the lift gets, the better it is. All you're gonna do is go to death failure on this bottom-up lift of your choice. And when you can't even budge the weight anymore, that's when the game begins. You're going to keep making attempts at moving this weight over and over and over again, even if it feels completely immovable and your efforts feel totally useless. And when you can't try any longer, you're just gonna put yourself out of that lift because it's bottom up and safe, and rest exactly as long as you need to start making attempts again. And do this over and over and over again for as long as you have the will. I say at least a couple minutes of attempts. As you do this, you should be trying to engage in a sort of exploratory play, where every time you try to move this way, even if it feels immovable, you're one, giving it your full effort and intention to move it, no matter how bad it feels. And then two, you're trying to find a way to creatively send the impulse to move or creatively approach moving the weight to solve the problem of it being immovable. You have to approach it as if it's a game or a puzzle you're trying to solve. The best way I can describe this mindset is that it's sort of the spirit of button mashing a controller to figure out the controls of a game that you're unfamiliar with. I typically use limit break style sets in the place of like a finisher exercise. And I think there's a lot of utility to performing these kinds of sets as often as you can handle, because sets like these really show their value in cumulative non-linear ways. They work sort of like a meditative practice. Most days doing them is going to feel totally useless and frustrating, and you probably won't be able to achieve anything more than them just being an intense rest pause set. However, every once in a while, your fatigue and frustration will back you into a wall until you have an insightful breakthrough. You'll suddenly get a flash of understanding about how you can approach moving the weight differently. And by applying that, you'll immediately be able to start repping the lift that just a moment ago you couldn't even budge. Then reflecting on that success and trying to understand what you did differently exactly will integrate and refine that insight into a generalizable and more permanent internal strength skill that you can then apply to all of your other lifts when you're fresh. This method is how I came up with and spontaneously figured out most of the skills that I've covered in this video. But it took me quite a long time because I had no map. Your experience should be very different. By understanding that internal strength skills exist and roughly how most of them work, you are massively ahead of the curve. You'll be able to go into many of these sets with the goal of playing around with one of my specific cues and come away from it with a better and more personalized version of that cue. Over the course of lots of practice, you'll eventually rediscover all of these concepts for yourself and come to know them better than anyone could have taught them to you. And now to that end, here's a quick review of everything we've covered so far and some additional insights that will help you to advance faster. First, by maintaining an awareness of the proprioceptive map of your whole body, you become much more balanced and aligned while moving. You also predispose your body to making a bunch of automatic, subtle adjustments that make it easier for your strength to flow. Sending impulses to tense different areas of your proprioceptive map allows you to generate a stiffening tension, which essentially allows you to incorporate every region of your body into one integrated whole body brace. Our second branch of skills covered the idea that internal mindful relaxation bolsters strength by allowing greater ability to tense physically. This principle was then further extended into sending the impulse to tense muscles in one explosive, all-or-nothing, mindful fashion with no hesitation or observation of the action. When these psychological concepts are applied to explosively contracting your whole body structure tension, pulses of energy get generated that you can then channel into the initiation of every phase of a lift to drive it forward. And finally, the driving force throughout the entire lift can be done in a sort of directionless, mindful, mushin sort of fashion to create an oscillation pattern in your effort that generates more momentum and force to move the lift forward. Now, even though I've laid out all these concepts as a handful of distinct ideas, actually learning them deeply and understanding how they interconnect is going to realistically require dozens of little insights that I could not possibly articulate to you. Specifically, the majority of the time you're going to spend learning these skills is really going to be centered around understanding the nuances of integrating different body parts into your whole body structure tension and learning the timing associated with using them for the purpose of explosive structuring. Now, some ideas to speed up your progress. First, you should be trying to integrate internal strength skills into your just general posture of daily life as much as you possibly can. Proprioceptive awareness and mindful movement can just be practiced 24/7 until they're second nature to you. And explosive intent can be used anytime you have to lift something or open doors. You can also play with basic structuring in your idle time. Spending time outside the gym, normalizing and making these skills habitual will make your actual direct training of your internal strength skills much more intuitive and productive. Now, to get extra funky, even the concept of limit break training itself can be integrated into your life more broadly than just a simple exercise or a set. And using it this way is probably the most common way the concept is used by other people in the wild. The essential nature of limit break training is just using exhaustion to drain your strength and then using the urgency of trying to maintain an arbitrary performance standard to encourage you to discover new strength to replace it. But that dynamic doesn't just have to happen over the course of a single set. You can also use the accumulated fatigue across multiple training days to achieve a similar effect, where you try to maintain some performance standard across multiple sets each day as fatigue mounts, and maintaining that same standard gets harder and harder. Eric Bucenhagan seems to have built a lot of his strength skill this way by trying to max out the same lift day after day and constantly trying to hit a new PR until his will just completely broke and he'd cycle to a new lift. Clarence Kennedy seems to have done something similar by trying to repeat an intense 5x5 squat routine, which he tried to match or exceed every day as his fatigue mounted, again until his will broke and he'd shift things around or rest. And Paul Anderson also seems to have played with methods similar to both of them, as well as employing a similar concept to limit break training by spreading out sets of heavy lifts throughout his entire day, many of them being bottom up, which presumably accumulated fatigue throughout the day and gave him plenty of time to fail lifts, recover, and then try again, making the entire day sort of a limit break set. Given their contexts, I consider these three to be some of the most impressive lifters I've ever seen, and I think it's no coincidence that they all happen to extensively employ training that was ideal for refining their internal strength skills and all ended up clearly demonstrating an extreme mastery of them. Most people view these guys as just simply being genetically gifted and discount the effect of their skill and grit on their success.
This is #1 bullshit.
What makes more sense to me is that a mastery of lifting has clearly bolstered their ability to progress in ways that the modern fitness zeitgeist just can't account for and blames on sheer genetic luck. And I think by refining your internal strength skills in a similar way, you can also tap into that same unaccounted for potential to progress way more than you might have ever considered possible. And this concept brings me neatly to the final chapter of this video, shitting on the fitness industry. The modern fitness industry has largely become a cesspool of reductionistic nerds who downplay or outright ignore the more subtle, nuanced, and subjective aspects of fitness, leaving behind immense blind spots and smothering the potential of many lifters. The not-so-obvious existence of internal strength skills and their capacity to quickly accelerate people's progression is merely one of these blind spots, but it's enough to act as a fantastic decoder lens to highlight the industry's narrow-mindedness. First, in light of internal strength skills, what constitutes training to failure becomes much more open-ended. For example, if I were to possess the average intermediate lifter like a vengeful spirit,
get ready to receive some Holy Spirit.
What?
I'm confident that I could rep whatever they would consider to be their maxes. Because the better a person's internal strength skills get, the more exertion they become capable of, and that moves what constitutes maximum effort closer and closer to their true physical limits, independent of things like motivation or arousal, making it so that when you apply max effort or train to failure, you're really approaching a blurry asymptote and not some kind of concrete limit. Therefore, when someone like Clarence Kennedy or Eric Bucenhagan saves a rep in the tank, they're operating past what a noob would consider to be failure. And when a noob goes to failure with a gun to his head, he is sandbagging without even realizing it because he just doesn't have the skill to muster all the exertion that his body's actually capable of. The implications of this are very damning for science-based influencers because it means that their general advice that almost everybody should be avoiding training to failure is complete bullshit, especially when it's predicated on the idea that very advanced lifters can get away with it. In order for training to be effective, it needs to be done at a pretty high level of exertion, and that continually gets higher as you get stronger. Meaning that while skilled lifters might be able to exert themselves deep enough to their true physical limits that they can make progress without hitting failure, which I still find suspect, the general population of noobs and intermediates certainly can't, at least not for long. They might get an initial performance buff from always being fully recovered when they start training like weenies, but that's all they're liable to get. Saving reps in the tank at such a low skill level makes their training so consistently far from deep exertion that it will just quickly stop stimulating growth. And by avoiding the deep end of their abilities habitually, they will also suppress the natural process of instinctively developing their internal strength skills unconsciously, until eventually they just get locked out of the ability to train hard enough to grow. And because they're sold the idea that training to failure is some sort of objective hard limit, they get caught in a sort of trap that's very hard to escape from. Barring stuff like injuries and muscle imbalances, this death spiral is one of the most common ways I see people just stall forever in the gym. Some chucklefuck nerd tells them that they have to save a rep or two in the tank because elite lifters do it, then they take that at face value and I watch them rep that lift, what should be their 20 rep max if they had well-developed internal strength skills, for an optimal 8 reps while believing that they're only saving 2 reps in the tank. Then they repeat that level of effort year after year without progression while believing that they must have hit their genetic ceiling because they're doing everything optimally. This dynamic also accounts for a lot of the success disparity you see among lifters, which, as I alluded to before, is often attributed falsely to genetics.
I lied. I'm not a scientist. Again, I am smarter than you, and you may want to leave me here, but...
When evidence-based losers ignore the effect of internal strength skills and assume that everyone's conception of maximum effort is roughly the same, it starts to look very unfair that 2 people can execute the exact same program and get wildly different results. And the presumed effect of other variables, in this case genetics, becomes overemphasized. But using the lens of internal strength skills, these disparities make a lot more sense. I've witnessed every genetic freak that I've ever personally encountered using many of the skills I've talked about today without even realizing it. They're just doing things that they picked up naturally by having very active childhoods and a more naturalistic upbringing. And essentially, my argument is that they're often not genetic anomalies. They're just embodying the concept of farmer strength. They were generally active guys with well-developed physical intuition that made them, off the rip, way stronger than you'd think they should be, and obviously more predisposed to growing like weeds the minute they started to train seriously with weights. If you gave a guy like that an identical program to a super optimizing nerd who has no physical intuition, of course he'll progress way faster. Not because he's necessarily gifted, but because he's actually going to try twice as hard on every set without even realizing it, while the nerd he's being compared against is doing the opposite.
No, hold on. No, hold on. I felt something really weird in my knee. And I injured my knee. Partially torn tendon. So that sucks.
Now, I'm certain inequalities do play a role in people's success as lifters, and I'm not saying internal strength skills can bridge the gap you see between people completely. but they have a very pronounced effect while going almost unnoticed. And they're certainly not the only subtle variable that works like this, which is why my entire channel is basically dedicated to articulating similarly overlooked avenues to increase your potential as a lifter. And the longer I look deeply into lifting, the more certain I am that we're barely scratching the surface of what's naturally possible, and that we barely understand why people grow or succeed as lifters. Because every time I discover something novel, I always find rudimentary traces of something similar happening unconsciously in the most genetically gifted lifters, which makes it more and more reasonable to me that what a very large amount of people consider to be innate talent isn't necessarily a matter of DNA, but instead largely a matter of unconscious physical intuition, making people train more effectively in ways that they and others don't even realize and can't account for, with internal strength skills merely being one of these manifestations. That means that your potential as a lifter is probably way more open-ended than almost anyone assumes, because we very clearly don't know what makes people into freaks, but a lot of it seems to be learnable, which is why you should be wary of all these pseudoscientific midwits who are confidently claiming that most of your lifting potential is a matter of unchangeable genetics. They're arrogantly assuming that all the variables that they currently happen to understand about lifting just so happen to be all the ones that matter. And then they're blaming anything that violates their expectations of people's success on the scientific sounding boogeyman of genetics with literally nothing to back it. None of these people have any understanding of genetics, they're not doing genetic testing, and they're certainly not referencing genetic research. They're just bullshitting you and hoping not to be checked.
Fuck you, science!
They're seeing that factors outside their knowledge clearly restrict people's ability to progress. But instead of investigating what those variables are, or at least admitting to the ambiguity, they're closing the case early and then using it as a podium to disparage the potential of other people.
When was it that the transformation to the legendary warrior of the Saiyan race was reduced to a child's plaything?
The modern fitness paradigm sees the path of a lifter's progress as mostly being linear and uncreative. You're supposed to listen to optimized scientific advice and programming, then supposedly, if you just stay the course long enough, you'll reach your quote-unquote genetic ceiling. Of course, inevitably, things never work out according to this ideal, but it's always assumed that the paradigm isn't wrong. You just simply haven't trained long enough, or strictly enough, or maybe even you need to buy some gentleman's AI program. And the lack of progress is constantly being supplemented by external gimmicks. Sometimes literal supplements, but other times lifting equipment or straight up gear, which these nihilistic scumbags just so happen to sell and facilitate. What a coincidence. But this model isn't the real way that getting stronger actually works. And if you're able to see the path broadly, it's very obviously not linear. It's more so stepwise, and it is inherently creative. In fact, the case I'm basically making is that it needs to be treated like an art and not a science, especially like the martial arts. Once again, respect to the OG. In the artistic view of a lifter's progress, people tend to develop steadily from conventional normal training until something restricts their progression. Then they stall until that restriction is overcome and a more linear path continues until something else becomes a rate-limiting weakness and the pattern repeats. And like I said before, that's usually a matter of some sort of limiting muscle weakness emerging that needs to be addressed, or a matter of reaching some sort of ceiling from a lack of internal strength skills, the problem for which this video was made. That means you can't simply treat plateaus like they'll go away on their own, nor can you treat them like mystical permanent limitations. They're a direct reflection that something is missing the mark in your current approach to training for your current needs, and to overcome them, your training has to continually evolve as your needs evolve. By the very nature of this dynamic, no one can give you an arbitrary bearing that you can simply follow through your entire lifting career, because no one could possibly account for all the specific restrictions you currently have or are liable to encounter in your training. Meaning that the only way to really progress long term is intense effort approaching every aspect of getting stronger with creativity, open-mindedness, and intuition. Looking constantly for lateral moves, for insights that can make you go forward past restrictions. This is essentially the exact state of mind that I advocated for previously on the chapter for limit break training, because the process of developing your internal strength skills is a microcosm for how strength works in general. what I would call the way of strength. The more you embody these virtues, the easier it is to get stronger, and perhaps even more importantly, the more you will develop as a person from your training, because constantly trying to make your mind fertile to both insight and extreme effort will etch into your very character, making you into somebody who embodies the archetypal traits of the truly strong, who are ubiquitously not anal nerds, but instead whimsical, authentic, and intuitive chads. This to me is maybe the most valuable aspect of getting stronger, and it's the part that's unfortunately smothered the most by buying into the deterministic scientism worldview.
Waging war against good people is bad for the soul. This may not seem important to you now, but it's the most important thing I've said.
Genetic determinism breeds bitterness towards those who have more than you, instead of a curiosity to understand why that might be the case.
Part of my brain that I didn't consent to made me frown and dipped my head down for me. It was almost like musculature in my neck just deactivated. It's an ancestral mechanism that everyone has. Kids all the way up through teenagehood and adulthood sort themselves, male children, into dominance hierarchies. It's just the dominance hierarchy sorting itself. And someone confronted me and I automatically sorted myself beneath them. I felt beneath someone. I felt weaker, more inferior, less apt, less capable, less confident, less strong. And I didn't even have consent to it. It's not something I chose. I was like, well, this kid will beat me up. I better not. It was totally a subconscious behavior. Preternaturally physically developed for his age. He was 10, so was I. He beat me in wrestling. He was the only person I believe to beat me in wrestling my whole childhood. When he did that to me, my whole perspective on the world changed for years. If he watches this and hits me up and goes, "Ha, I got you, little bitch," if I see him in real life, I might take something from him medical science can't give him back.
The view that there's only one superior scientific way to train breeds elitism and stubbornness, instead of the humility you'd naturally develop by constantly experimenting and realizing all the ways you're holding yourself back.
But what I wanted to say is, you've never met anyone with as much willpower as me. And whatever it is you think you're good at in your life, I'd probably take about a year and become an authority in the field in which you think you're good.
And finally, the most insidious is that the fixation on external means of achieving progress breeds the greed of a hungry ghost. It makes you always look for the next bit of technology that'll free you from your weakness, while it all ultimately turns to dust in your hands, and often gradually mutates you into either a scientific abomination or a golem made of spandex and leather.
Stretchy fabrics and leather belts are no longer just for German sex raves. They can be used to almost literally hold your body together.
Skin removal here to get clear shoulder lines. I carry a lot of fat there. Probably this situation here, I'm going to reduce the skin. Procedure called body type, because I hold a lot of skin there. And very likely this is going to be major surgery. They're going to cut into me and take my abs and then stitch them closer together. Good to that. And they're going to take my obliques and double stitch them closer together. And then they are going to put a plastic permanent mesh around that whole thing to get the waist to do this, and they're gonna sew everything back together. But like, that's a little preview. I want like the robotic parts. I want to be part machine, desperately close.
The real philosophical core of this video is to express the opposite view, that the real way of strength is internal. It's a process of continual introspection and insight and creativity. And the more you understand that, the more it breeds in you a continual wonder and awe of what you could be capable of, and what I genuinely hope you all achieve. Thank you for watching, and happy lifting.